what I want to do today and share with you guys is how fashion kind of works and how I instruct my classes here at CSVPA Boston. What I always tell my students to do is really start with a source of inspiration. And for me, I derive a lot of inspiration from very defiant figures in history, particularly women, because that's who I was interested in designing for. So women like Georgia O'Keeffe, Joan Didion, Amelia Earhart, Tina Turner, these are women that inspire me in a multitude of ways. But really, you know, I'm able to kind of hone in on the things that drive them as creative individuals in order to sort of get my design juices flowing when I am designing. So when I say start with a source of inspiration, you know, there's always that feeling that you want to have behind it. But then you want to get a visual. And I think that every collection, every design, you know, it has to start with an image. And this was an image that I had started with, and it's an image that I draw back to a lot as I designed in my own career outside of CATS as a designer. But once you start with an image, you want to collect more. You know, you want to be able to draw from a multitude of different things. You want to have a bunch of different creative visual things at your disposal, because ultimately what we're doing is we're creating a visual medium for other people to digest. So you want to find things that represent the inspiration that is more direct. So pictures of the person, if it's a person. But then what did that person do? Amelia Earhart was the first female aviator. You know, she was told that she could never fly planes because she's a woman, and she still did it. So I found imagery of the planes that she would fly. And that started a lot of creative thinking for me. So when we start to sort of creatively think and we start to put together our sketchbook, you know, we want to put our ideas down however they flow. And for me, I'm not one of those people that just sort of like thinks sketch. And what I've learned from working as a teacher here at CATS, as well as in different places in New York and Massachusetts, is that, you know, there is no single way to come up with design ideas. So here, you can see that for me, I like to start on the dress form with a fabric called muslin. It's just like a cheap cotton that drapes very well. It's very easy to control. And that helps me sort of start to like look at the images that I have and maybe start to reinterpret them in ways that I find compelling. So whether that's creating a bigger sleeve or working with a yoke, creating back details, creating lapel details, then I'm able, when I have that, I'm able to go in and sort of reapply them to sketches and different versions of drawn medium. For my students, the 4 ways that I sort of encourage them to what I say ideate. I don't know if that's a real word. I have a degree in fashion, not English. Is I ask them to either drape on the dress form, like here, to draw figures, like this one here, to draw flats, which is a line drawing, that if you're not very good with the figure and the gesture of the figure, I totally understand that. That was very much so me when I first started doing this. It was very easy for me to just sort of draw what it looks like and include detail that way. And then the 4th one that you will not see in this presentation, but I've seen a lot of students have success with, is the idea of collage. And collage is kind of like draping, but on a flat surface of paper. And it really just enables you to do a bunch of creative things without getting or having to have access to a dress form. Another thing that I like to do is throw up fabric samples, just to think through like what I could potentially do, transforming conventional fabric manipulations like pleating into my own sort of version. And we're going to get into that in a bit, or we're going to get into it now. Again, this is another fabric manipulation. It's called pin tucking. It's a little messy. I think that I was probably up until 3 a.m. doing this project way back when I did it. So after you sort of have started to hone in on what your sort of direction is, and the direction that I took was the kind of laissez-faire but masculine clothing that Amelia Earhart would wear as her uniform as an aviator, like you can see up here. But I wanted to take those planes, and I wanted to take the texture of them and the riveting of them, these airplanes, and apply it to clothing, because I felt like, you know, if Amelia could have worn that plane as clothing, you know, I bet she would have. So I took the different shaping and sort of almost puzzle piece like effect, and I turned that into yoke details on skirts, on shirts, on jackets, on dresses. And then I added a lot of top stitching because there's a lot of riveting on planes, you know, and I wanted to apply it in that kind of way. And this is kind of what I mean when I talked about in that video. You know, don't decide who you are as a designer, or what you want to do with your designs until you've really had a chance to really flesh them out. You can see a lot of different ideas here, and ideas that don't always go together, but that's fine. You know, you create a diverse array of silhouettes and garments and ideas, and then after that, you want to do that so that after that you can boil them down into something that's more cohesive, and edit it into what we call our final edit or collection. And what a collection is it's a series of garments that are done up in a line, that show a cohesive thought, but also, you know, they carry through an idea of an entire wardrobe. And this is something that you'll have experience with in my class, you'll have experience with in college, if you go to fashion college, because ultimately, as a designer, this is what's expected of you. You're expected to follow through with a consistent idea of a brand's identity to ship out to a customer that expects that kind of consistent thought process. So you want to take details that are in sweaters and you want to reapply them to skirts or jackets, you know, reutilizing colors, and it needs to be able to flow. And that's something that I was always taught, and I find that really, really works in this kind of frame. So if you start, one of my favorite tricks to do is if you start with a color, end with a color. You know, I threw this sort of like orangey color on the inside of this bomber jacket. And this collection ended up getting me a coveted internship at the Gap. Because I think my interviewer even noted, you know, like, I love that you put that orange in there. And that was just something that I had thrown in at the last second because I thought it was cute. You know, clothing is emotional. You want people to have an emotional reaction to your clothes. Think of the clothes that you buy. You know, sometimes it's, you know, I need jeans or a t-shirt, but sometimes it's like, oh my God, I really love that. And that makes me feel like who I am. And I think that's why you have to start with inspiration that drives you, because even though it's unique to you in a personal way, other people are going to be able to relate to clothing that is emotional, that comes from a place. So this would be marketed to that kind of like defiant tomboy, I'm going to dress how I want to. And then with your finishes, as they're called, we put in the flats and we make them much more sort of attractive and finished than we would sort of if we were just jotting them down in our sketchbook to ideate. So this is not where it stops, right? In my class, after you do your collection, you figure out something that you want to make. And one of the things that I did in college and that I continue to do in my career is I try to re-examine everything in a sustainable lens. So I had taken this collection and I started reimagining it in a type of design called zero waste pattern making. And what zero waste pattern making is a type of pattern making that when you cut the pieces out that you then go and sew together into a garment, it creates no waste. It leaves no pieces behind. So this confunds me to this day why instead of a cockpit, I have a Mini Cooper. I don't know what the thought process was there, but you know what? That's part of the magic of design is that sometimes you don't always know exactly what you were thinking, but you know where it got you. So when I started to do this Amelia Earhart idea in a zero waste concept, I knew that I had to sort of go back in and choose the piece that I wanted to do, which was the bomber jacket, and reimagine it as a zero waste idea. And I went back to draping because that's how I think, that's how my brain operates. And I had taken these pieces of fabric and I just wanted to see, okay, am I going to be able to take the easy way out here and just sort of drape them into the shape of a jacket? Turns out absolutely not. That's just not how clothing works. So what I started to do is I started to rethink what this jacket was going to have to look like. I had experience trying to do zero waste before. And I knew that these kind of geometric pattern pieces were really going to help me as I went to go cut into my fabric. One of the things that I always try to get my students to think about is sketchbooks are your stream of consciousness on a piece of paper. It does not just mean, doing sketches or having it be pretty. Sometimes it should look like a diary. You want to be able to follow a stream of thought so that you know where you are as your process goes along, and you can go back and sort of reflect on things in case you get lost in your own head. I think that everyone, regardless of what kind of artist you are, what kind of art you're interested in, you get lost sometimes. You get either lost painting that picture, you get lost in a drawing, and you're just like, oh my God, where was I going with this? Writing things down, keeping your process on paper so that you can follow the intention of it is really, really, really important. Because if you don't do that and you get lost, then that idea that was germinating in your head and percolating in your head, it just it can vanish, and no one wants that to happen because we all have those moments of, oh no, what was I thinking? Put it down on a piece of paper. I don't know if anyone took the time to read any of this. I'm sure it's absolute gibberish because, again, I was just putting my thoughts down on paper. So what I also wanted to do is I wanted to make this a full look. And I wasn't 100% comfortable making one of the pieces that was in the original collection as the bottom piece or the skirt for this look. And I wanted to try something new. I wanted to challenge myself a little bit more. So for this method of zero waste pattern making, I was just kind of able to do it out on paper. I was like, okay, it's going to be a pleated skirt. It's going to have tiers that I sew together. And I'm going to reverse the fabric so that I get different ideas from tier to tier. Or I have different visual effects from tier to tier. It's going to look stunning. But then, there's also the method of pattern making wherein you're starting to sort of put together that muslin, right? You're cutting out those initial pieces. And it's okay. This is the part where it's okay to waste a little bit of fabric. The idea is to, when you go to make the finished piece, then you're not wasting fabric. But if a couple of pieces of cotton, unbleached cotton fabric that have no chemicals in them, end up in a landfill, if it stops a ton of waste from going into a landfill, then I think you've succeeded. But this is the other way to kind of do pattern making instead of doing it on paper. you put it together, you sew it together, and you start to look, okay, where does this need to change? And you start to take it apart. And for zero waste pattern making, what that means after you take it apart is it kind of turns into a puzzle. And you have to put cuts in it that you didn't think you were potentially going to need. And it really changes a lot of things in your garment, but you want those changes to be intentional. You want to think of them as new design features in your design. So again, I'm writing down my thoughts, okay? Even if they are totally crazy stream of consciousness nonsense, it's helpful to, first of all, get it out, mental health first. But it's also helpful to look back and think, okay, what was I thinking at this time? And another thing, it's good to have your process side by side. You never know how these two things are going to marry into each other, influence each other as you're creating your art. So I would always put just whatever I was doing on the page, and then sort of just go organically from there. So once you have your sort of pattern done, right? This is my pattern. These outlined black pieces were the pieces that I needed to fill in. I needed to figure out what I was going to do with them. But once you have your other pieces done and you're ready to cut them out, you want to make sure that you are documenting them, right? That way, these are a lot of weird little pieces, right? You want to make sure that they are cataloged in there where they are supposed to be. So in case you have a moment of weakness or you have to back off of something and you have to come back to it much later, you have a good idea of what you were doing so that you can follow through with it. And then again, as you sort of start putting it together, you want to start thinking about how to make these things, these little changes, feel very intentional and very purposeful. Because once you're designing, you don't want anything to kind of look like, oh, well, you want to give it intention. So these kinds of ideas really reflected the kind of stitching on bomber jackets I had seen Amelia Earhart wearing, the kind of piecing of airplanes that I had seen her wearing, and then just including a lot of top stitching and featuring the raw edges of materials felt very intentional to me. And then down here, you can see the pieces. I think this was piece D that I had outlined. I ended up turning it into the facing for the collar of the jacket. So again, it wouldn't go to waste. I would also like to point out that you put things in your sketchbook any way you can. I was pinning pieces of paper into this sketchbook because I was really just not feeling glue or tape. I don't know why. But again, you do what you can. So once you sort of have your pieces done, you really want to look at them very critically. And one of the things that I did was I looked at my skirt and I saw the way that it was coming together on the inside. And I saw these beautiful seams, these beautiful raw edge seams that were on the inside of the garment, just looking stunning. And I wanted to give them a feature. And what I ended up doing is I turned the skirt inside out. Because I just thought to myself, you know what, like there's so much beautiful texture here. It's so delicate. And it's really reflective of this idea of piecing together that I'm so interested in. And that's just one of the ways where, like, if you're making something, your process can inform you more so than, making a decision before you're sort of starting to go. And that's really what I mean when I talk about that. If you decide, well, this is what it's going to be, no matter what I go through in my process, then you're really not letting yourself design. You're kind of just, it's almost like a math equation at that point, and you lose the emotion from it. And again, write down what you're feeling. I really had to think about, do I want these sort of like raw edges on the outside? Or do I not? Of course I did, because it went along with the raw edges that I was using in my jacket. But you want to make sure that you're doing the right thing for your design process. So ultimately, you know, sometimes things just work. And I ended up with a garment almost a year and a half after I had started the process with this Amelia Earhart inspiration that I was really, really proud of. And I just want to reiterate, this was a year and a half of process. You know, things that inspire you, they don't just begin and end with one project. You can carry them through as many projects as you possibly can think of. Amelia Earhart is still someone that inspires me today, as well as the other women that I mentioned. Because, you know, that's really what an inspiration is. It's not just this idea that you take advantage of for some random project. It's something that you want to really be thoughtful of, and that has a real emotional value to you. Because ultimately, as a sustainable designer, more so than just not making any waste, you want this piece to be something that's permanent, that stays with people for a long time, so that they're not just randomly consuming clothes from fast fashion outlets. You want it to speak to someone and be something that they're going to have for a very, very long time. And what I was able to do with this jacket is I ended up recycling it into the key piece of my senior thesis collection in college when I went to Parsons. Um, and it influenced, as you can see, all of the other pieces that I made for my senior thesis collection, which were all zero waste garments. And that's something that I am really excited to start doing with my students here at CSVPA Boston, my specific fashion students, is experimenting with this type of thing. And other ways that we can sort of be sustainable, because believe it or not, everything on the screen right now that you see is a type of sustainable design, is not just zero waste pattern cutting, but it's also the upcycling of garments. This was a 2 pairs of overalls, one in camo and one in khaki, that I made into an anorak jacket. Again, you can see the sort of like riveting and piecing influences of the Amelia Earhart inspiration that I was still sort of working through. This was a pair of jeans that had a massive hole in it, so I just decided to turn it into this cute little cropped bomber jacket. And then I made this pair of pants, or in this dress out of a pair of pants. And it's this kind of upcycling, you know, that colleges like Parsons, like Central St. Martin's, like FIT are really looking for. And that's what I'm trying to bring to my students as a teacher, is to make sure that they're getting the kind of education that they need so that they can get into any college that they want to. These garments are both made of unconventional materials. This was a fire hose and a sling that I made into a jacket. The dress underneath is made out of medical bandages. This was a beach chair, a volleyball net, a beach mat, and a pineapple that I was able to make into a look. And a lot of these things I still have today. These were recycled materials that I just had ended up on the cutting room floor, and I didn't know what to do with them. So I made this one, which had been a feature in a jumpsuit, into its own dress out of scraps. And then this, I just had a ton of leftover, so I made it into this giant ball gown, which I then recycled again and took it apart and gave it to one of my students, who made it into a jacket for one of her friends. So, you know, this concept of sustainability and recycling, and really being conscious of, you know, your impact as a designer and the multitudes of ways that you can continue to express yourself creatively, they really never stop. And again, you always want to make sure that the things that you make are really important and intentional, because you can always wear them again. Anyways, thank you so much. My name is Sam Donovan, and I am the fashion teacher at CATS, and I cannot wait to, I think I'm going to hear questions now, if possible.
Kathleen's asked if you can share out the fashion show to our audience.
How the curriculum works at CATS is, it's reflected in the process that I showed here, from inspiration to ideation to sketching to collection to creating a final garment. And if I can find some of those final garments, because I know that they're in here somewhere, I will definitely share those with you. But it's just, and then we have a fashion show at the end of the year where students get to show their work, and it's always very exciting. Students have a lot of fun doing it. Students get to model in the fashion show as well. I think I have some photos. All right, so these are some of the images that we have from our student fashion show. And there are a lot in here, but you can really see that students are encouraged to be unique in any way that they can. And all of these students are beginner sewers as well. You're not being encouraged to be a perfectionist when you come here. You're coming here to learn. And that's what I'm here for, is to teach you how to put these things together. But again, all of these are beginner students that are making these things. I forgot that this young man did not want to wear a shirt. And I encourage creativity. This was something that this student put together. And he was like, this is really what I want to do. This is what I'm passionate about. I was like, okay, let's figure out a way to do it. And we did it, and it looked fantastic. This was a garment that we had the fabric custom printed for a student because she wanted it to say a specific message. And then this was a nice little sequin gown. Tips that I would give students thinking of joining CSVPA Boston, and those tips are just do it. Fashion is not something that you have to overthink. Really what you need to start doing is just doing it. And if you have an interest in fashion, I love working with new students and people who are just getting into fashion because I think that there's so much raw imagination there. And it's my job to kind of make sure that gets translated into clothing and gets translated into design. However the student's imagination will let them. So just pick up a needle and thread and come join my class. Tips for beginners. In terms of design, look for things that motivate you to design. I just think that so many people get bogged down at the beginning of their experience as fashion designers with trying to do the right thing or trying to be one of these giant brands like Gucci or YSL Saint Laurent. See, that's age talking. YSL is what Saint Laurent was called back when I was in college. And you're not supposed to be there. These houses have been around for hundreds of years, or at least 100 years. And they have tons of people that are informing them creatively every step of the way. And you could be one of those people one day. So I think that just sort of getting down and doing it is the best advice that I can give anyone wanting to do anything creative. And then as far as sewing goes, there are things called garment patterns that you can pick up. They're like $5. And all you need is that and some cotton fabric that you like, and you can just start cutting those out and sewing them together and have a ball. Yes, zero waste can apply to, every single line of design and art, I think. I have tons of friends who are sustainable artists, and they use found materials and recycled materials. There's so much opportunity for things that we really just consider waste. In fact, what my students are working on right now is they're creating garments from unconventional sources like newspaper and trash bags. And I've challenged them to sort of, take these things that might just end up in the trash and to create art with them. So I think that that's been really exciting for them, and we're starting to see some really cool results. But it's definitely been interesting, I think, for quite a few of them to try to try to be working with these materials when they're used to sewing fabric. Certainly. Thank you for being part of this and giving me your attention this morning. It has been it's been a lot of fun.